Hey, what's up, everyone? Morey here, and today we're going to be talking about why overstriding is crucial for your running performance and your ability to run faster. I know it's very common for people to believe that overstriding actually makes you slower and is a negative thing when it comes to sprinting, but after doing a little bit of research, I really believe that overstriding is actually a critical thing that helps you improve your running. And a big reason why I also looked more into this is just because I use the curved treadmill a lot. So people are always saying that, oh yeah, when you use the curved treadmill, that kind of gets you to overstride more. And so I couldn't be more excited to, with some of this research, find that actually being able to overstride is a good thing when it comes to running. And I'm going to present some of the things that I've found, and you could use that in your own training to hopefully make it so you improve or not. If you disagree with it, that's all good. I think an important thing to do to start off the video is clearly defining overstriding. So when just looking it up on Google, it is when a runner's foot lands too far in front of the hip during initial contact. And that's really what brought me into this whole concept of what is too far, right? So when it says too far in front of the hip, is that right in front of the hip? Is that inch in front of the hip? Like, where is too far? So that's where the whole idea came into play, where I started research more into what is overstriding and came up with it actually can increase performance. Now, there are some, I think, negatives, and I do want to get into that as well. There are some things that definitely happen when you overstride. You create more shock in the body, can decrease performance, can create braking forces, can be more susceptible to injuries. Those are things that definitely happen if you overstride too much. There is a balance between where overstriding is going to be beneficial and not beneficial. So I don't want you to just think like, oh yeah, I'm promoting all overstriding. It is all good no matter what. If you're landing with your foot in front of your hip, you're doing the right thing. I disagree with that. I'm not saying that, but I do want to go over what I think are going to be three things or three reasons why landing with a bit of an overstride is something that will help you in running faster, and which some of the data has shown when it comes to your ability to overstride when it comes to running faster. So the big thing I want to first do, though, is show some of the top sprinters in the world, the fastest people in the world, and show them and their overstriding. And really, because part of what went into overstriding when first looking into it was just landing with the foot in front of the hip, the foot in front of the center of mass, the center of gravity. That's what a lot of these quote unquote overstriding principles go to. And so there, I do think, becomes a time period where too far in front of the hip is definitely a bad thing. But to me, if you can land with the leg straight, generate a lot of force into the ground, and land on the front part of the foot, then you are not going to be overstriding. But we could see here what the definition is when you're landing with that foot, quote unquote, too far in front of the hip, or foot in front of the center of mass, foot in front of the hips, in front of the body. All those things would be what Usain Bolt is doing right here. And at first I thought maybe it was just the left leg, right? Because then the left leg is generating not as much force, and he definitely does it a little bit more on the left in comparison to the right. But we just saw the right leg. In both of his legs, he's definitely landing with the foot out in front of the hip. So there's one person. Next one we'll go to is Noah Lyles. Maybe it's just Usain Bolt. Maybe Usain Bolt is just this person that is on a whole nother level and nobody else can ever run like he did. Or the reality is that many sprinters are actually landing with their feet in front of their hip. And again, quote unquote, overstriding. Okay, so this line is a 90-degree angle. We're seeing where the foot's landing, and there's no real definition of like where on the foot, by the way. So I'm just going based off of where the initial contact is happening, which is more towards the front part of the foot, right? Because the heel is off the ground here slightly. So I'm not saying that's like a contact point. I think that where that force is striking the ground, which to me is not necessarily on the front, especially for him, maybe a little bit further back, but that's still pretty far in front of the hip. So there's another one. So I thought maybe it's just that sprinters do that. Maybe field sport athletes, because they're a little bit different, that they will be landing more with their foot underneath their center of mass. When looking at Xavier Worthy, we're seeing somebody that's landing with their foot in front of their hips, in front of their center of mass, their center of gravity. And so therefore, they would be considered overstriding. So what ends up being, I think, the important concept to understand here when it comes to overstriding is it's based off of how fast you're moving. So the people that are moving at a lot slower pace, what ends up being the overstride kind of green area where you want to reach to is going to be a lot closer to right underneath the hip in comparison to the faster somebody is going, the faster something is moving. This is more for the long distance runners. This is where the data came from. The faster somebody's running, the more in front it is for them to be able to land with the foot in front of the hip. And so that's when I first started saying, okay, well, if that's true, then why wouldn't sprinters be in that same category? Why wouldn't they be allowed to be able to land with the foot furthest in front of the hip? And the first thing to me that ends up really standing out when it comes to that concept is the ability to control your body, be able to strike the ground with the maximum amount of force, right? We just saw that Usain Bolt, he's generating thousands of pounds of force into the ground, close to 1,000 on the left, over 1,000 on the right. So he's generating thousands of pounds of force as he's striking the ground. Well, in order for him to then be able to balance and control and then toe off from that position, he has to be able to have a good amount of time to be able to shift his hips forward. So essentially what differentiates the fastest people in the world from people that are not as fast is as the foot hits the ground, how much distance does the body travel? Okay, so people that are faster when that foot hits the ground are picking up more distance with the body before this foot comes off the ground. So what that essentially means is if we are landing directly under the body or center of mass, then by the time the foot would come off the ground, the foot would be so far back behind that we wouldn't be able to maintain balance or control to make it so then we can consistently create large amounts of force into the body. So the ability to consistently accelerate, which is really what horizontal force is. This goes back into why horizontal force is so important when it comes to running, is in order to continue to run fast and generate large amounts of horizontal force, you have to be landing with the foot slightly in front of the hip to make it so then you can actually control yourself during that foot strike. So that's reason number one why overstriding can actually be beneficial to your performance. Number two is going to be stride length and distance. So one of the things, again, we'll use Usain Bolt. I just like to use Usain Bolt because he's the fastest ever. So, we could use Noah Lyles. We could use any of these types of guys. What ends up differentiating most of these elite sprinters is based off of their height, they're able to cover much more distance per step than the average person. That's what makes them elite sprinters, right? So Usain Bolt takes 41 steps to run a 100-meter dash. Most people are going to be mid 40s that are even elite level, and people that are not elite are closer into the 50s. And so it really differentiates, again, what makes Usain Bolt so unique is how much distance he's able to cover. Well, if you are limiting the amount of distance you're covering per step because you're trying to keep that foot more underneath your hip, what that's going to do is make it so you don't get the same type of distance per step. So it's kind of contradictory to say the fastest people in the world are covering 100 meters in 41 steps or 42, 43 steps, but average person is covering in 50 steps. In order to get closer to that elite level athlete, you need to have a shorter stride, right? You need to not stride more. You need to make sure that your foot is underneath you the whole time. Where when you watch these top guys, obviously they're landing with their foot in front of them. So it makes more sense the more that you think about it that in order to increase your stride length, we have to kind of overstride a little bit and then just be able to effectively land and stabilize and control that to make it so then you can continue to improve your speed. And the third reason is really my own preference in the reasoning behind it. I guess the other two are kind of my own kind of thought processes too. But number three is going to be stay healthy. And the reason I think it goes into health is because if we are overworking the joints consistently or the muscles consistently, so if you're trying to essentially achieve something that your body is not set up or wired to be able to do, I do think that will end up negatively impacting your ability to stay healthy, right? Makes it so you become more at risk for injury. So in order for you to be healthier, you want to be doing more of what the body wants to do or should be doing, or makes it so the movements are more efficient. When you're working against gravity, when you're working against some of the natural biomechanics of the body, what you do is you set yourself up to become much more injured, much more likely. And especially people that are having multiple, maybe hamstring injuries or problems with their knee issues. With that being said, I do want to preface all this by saying that there is overstriding that is bad. Some things that you want to look out for when it comes to your potential overstriding that's going to be negative is really the braking force. The braking force is when you're landing with the heel. If you're landing with the leg straight and the heel down now and your foot's out in front of you, now that is slowing you down. What you want to be looking for is somebody landing on their toes while also generating large force in the ground, while also maintaining a long, straight leg, right? So being able to get this leg all the way extended and then landing on the toes is going to be a good way to be able to say, okay, that is, while overstriding, that is a healthy way of overstriding. That's going to make it so you can continue to run fast. And essentially it goes down into, I think, force production. So the more you can control that force production in the ground, because essentially if you're landing on the heel, then you're not going to be able to really build up that same type of force into the ground and really not going to be able to generate any horizontal force in the ground. Almost 100% will be vertical, which is going to be braking, which is going to make it so then you don't run fast. So it should be something that ends up being very natural to see. Another thing that came to mind when it comes to the overstriding is the acceleration, right? We do want to be able to understand, and there's a lot of people that talk about, oh, you're overstriding during the acceleration. And when you watch Coleman here, I love watching this just because I think the view is great. I think it being in slow motion is great. And Christian Coleman is one of the best starters in the world. I would say he's landing more under his center of mass. He's landing more under his center of gravity. This would not be considered overstriding in at least my opinion. And same type of thing with this second step, maybe a little bit closer to out in front of himself with the landing of the foot. But in general, to me, I think that he is landing underneath his center of mass. But what stands out is where he's landing with the foot. Instead of being so caught up in where is your stride, are you overstriding? To me, what ends up being more important is, are you landing on the front part of the foot? And are you able to consistently accelerate from there? Because now we could definitely make more of the argument that he's landing out in front of his center of mass. Now, I think spine position ends up being important. I think head position ends up being important, especially during the acceleration phases. And I also would say that hip position ends up being very important, or hip height. And so what I'm more coaching when teaching people to be able to run fast is the height of the hips, the speed of the arms, landing on the more of the ball of the foot, not necessarily overstriding in general. Again, this is something that I've more started to look into and wanted to be able to understand a little bit deeper in the last few days. So I definitely am not cueing that. I still don't think I would cue overstriding to say like, oh yeah, you should be really reaching a ton out. But I do think that it is something that you can be, or I know I can be in my coaching and my explanations a little bit more clear on. And I think that there's things that are more important to really coach and concentrate on when it comes to your ability to strike the ground and run fast that are going to make it so you can lead to much better improvements and changes rather than really trying to overemphasize the position of the foot landing under the hip. As always, guys, I hope you like this information. If you do, click that thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel. We'll have a few other videos that you can check out to be able to learn a little bit more about sprinting here. And we also will have some things down in the description in terms of some of the programs we have and ways that we could help you improve your speed. And as always, thanks for watching.